Hey there, Mike Chin back again, and in this video I just want to share with you a couple of those two pillars inside your compass, and those two things are about identity and character. So what does identity mean from a definition perspective? And if you read on the screen, identity is the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. So the two words that stuck out to me were fact, and the second is who. Who am I really, and is this a fact? So I believe that the Bible is true, and I call myself a Christian, and I have been for many years, decades actually. But I struggle with my relationship with God. So not just as a Christian, but as a Christian man. So on my journey, I've done a few different courses to find out what that looks like. So I've done things like Wild at Heart by John Eldridge. I've done Search for Life by Alan Mai down in Melbourne. And while they all had really great content, nothing really sank in for me. It was still quite head knowledge. So I stayed on the path and still looking for that relationship to finally click. So I attended another course recently, and and they shared this verse on the screen, and it says, "I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons." And they've gone through a really great course, and I'll share some of that in the next few slides. But it's actually birthed, helped create the Stretcher Bearers. So that had such a big impact on me, that course. Now, while I knew this truth that I'm a son of God intellectually, I wanted to be more real to me. And a funny thing happened to me, and I'll share with you now, that it's really changed how I look at my relationship with God. So during the course, they actually shared how God had fathered different people, different men in the group, through interactions with other men and different circumstances. Now, while I thought that was cool for them, I said, well, God hasn't spoken to me like that, so, it's good for you, but so what? At the time, I didn't really think anything of it, but I still had that question, does God really want to father me? And what does that relationship look like? I just had that question I wanted answered. So about a week after the course, I was pondering this question. I had my journal out. I was sitting in a cafe drinking a cup of coffee, and as I sat there and journaled and asked God, do you want to father me, and what does that look like? Then this thing happened. So I sat there having my coffee. I looked up, and this father pushed his way with his son in the pram and pushed his way through the chairs that were pretty tight knit, and he sat right in front of me. Now, like I said, there's plenty of chairs all over the place, but he just sat right there in front of me. And then the question bounced in my head, God does want to father me, and this is what it could look like. So I wanted to remember that. I thought, wow, what a coincidence, And then I wanted to take a photo just to remember what happened just then. And as I took the photo and I looked at the photo afterwards, this is what you see on the screen is what happened. So the child looked at the father, and the father looked at the child, and they had a connection. And I thought, wow, that's pretty crazy. So, that was probably the first time that I've experienced, God fathering me through circumstance. And since that time, I've been more attuned to looking out for those things, and I've actually seen God work and talk to me through different circumstance, situation, and other men. Maybe He's been trying to talk to me all the time, but I've just been too blind to see, ego-driven, just not to see what He's there trying to talk to me. Now with that change of relationship, with all these different occurrences, the prodigal son, the story of the prodigal son means so much more to me. And the particular verse, he got up from the book of Luke. He says he got up and went to his father. That's the prodigal son. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, and he was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And I just, I think it can be that intimate with God. Now that I've had a few experiences like that, my problem in the past is. And this is what I shared in the Proven course, that some men, including myself in the old days, used to view God as a slave, as a master, rather than a loving father. So I'll just quickly go through this table. Like, if you see the image of God, if you believe you're a slave to God, then you see God as a master. In terms of the image of God, if you're a son, then you see God as a loving father. In terms of dependency, are you self-reliant or independent? Or are you interdependent with God, and you need God? is your theology? You know, do you live by the law and the Ten Commandments, or do you live in love? For security, are you insecure? Do you lack peace? Or do you believe you're a son? And then if you are, then you have peace and rest. Do you strive for approval, right? Out in the world, do you strive for approval and the acceptance of man, or are you totally accepted by God's love and justified by grace? And the big one for me, another big one for me, was self-image. You know, self-rejection from comparing myself to others. I used to always, and still do sometimes, compare myself to others. Or if you view God as a father, then are you positive and affirm because you know that you have such value that you have so much value to God? Like, do you view it that way? Now, there's a lot of challenges in there for us to look at, and you know, for me, I had to make that switch. Am I a slave or am I a son? Make the decision and then move across into that thinking. But you know, circumstances in life don't always happen the right way, because your life isn't always a bed of roses. And I used to think to God and shake my hand at God and saying, you know, have you got the wrong kid? Like, really? You know, you called me a son, and and I'm a Christian, and I believe, I go to church and all the rest of it. But my circumstances, they're just, you know, rubbish. Like, I haven't got, you know, if you love me, then shouldn't I have more money in the bank? You know, is my wife a different, you know, why is my wife a different woman to the one that I married? You know, why have my kids gone off the rails? Why isn't my business deals going really well? Or why haven't I got, you know, all that type of stuff. And then something else that I've learnt recently may help you as well, is this slide here. That I came to understand that there's, in the Hebrew, in the Old Testament, that there's no such word as coincidence. And for me, that means that everything that happens in life is for a reason, and that things happen to us, or God allows things to happen to us. So when life isn't so rosy for me now, I ask a different question of, like, you know, why I haven't got enough money in the bank. He says, I ask the question, you know, what do you want to teach me, God, about my current situation or circumstance to make me a better person? So, you know, with this new framework, I'm in a much better place with God. Now, it's not perfect, but, you know, it's a relationship that I can work with and I want to work at. So now that I know that God still wants the best for me, he just loves me so much that he wants to teach me lessons so I can be a better person and a better man for it. So just like my earthly kids, if they just kept coming to me with a whole list of, you know, I wants, then I get tired of that pretty fast, and they don't learn anything from that relationship. Sometimes for my own kids, I've let them go through some tough times and withheld some things that I know I could give them, because I want them to be resourceful and do things on their own so they can actually learn and become independent and strong in their own character. So often, and sometimes we blame ourselves, and because things aren't happening, we blame ourselves for that type of stuff as well. And I suffer from that. You know, I've made some stupid choices in the past, and that has impacted on how I can come back to God and say, God couldn't love me because I'm so, you know, stupid or made bad decisions. And I just thought I'd share something else I learned from at the course too. There's a difference between shame and guilt. Like, if you do things wrong, and everyone does, then we've got to be very mindful that, you know, we aren't shamed of because of the circumstance. There is guilt, but we're not shamed. Now, the difference is that guilt just says that the action that we did is bad, or inappropriate. So guilt is totally focused on the action, whereas shame takes that action and then puts it on the person. So instead of saying that action was bad, you say, I am bad. And that can really stuff someone up in actually coming back to God and building that relationship again. But the good news is that in Romans 8:1, it says, therefore there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So if you've done something bad, then you don't have to feel condemned, that there is no condemnation, because, you know, it says it in the Bible, so there is a way back. And if you are struggling with that relationship with God, then start talking to him, and you can actually restore the relationship. And something that's helped me as well to restore that relationship is this process, which is the process of restoration, which is firstly be convicted that you're doing the wrong thing sometimes, And that you need, the second part is you need to confess that. So you just tell the Father that you're sorry. The next one is repentance. So you've got to change that behaviour. 180 degrees, turn around and just change that behaviour. And then God's more than willing to forgive if you just ask for the forgiveness. So forgiveness is given. And lastly is restoration occurs. And then you can get back in that right place with God and build that relationship again. So that's just some of the things that have helped me in terms of my trying to understand my identity with God, and to come back to that relationship and have eyes to see Him, how He works in this world, that He wants to teach me stuff, not to punish me, become better and stronger. And hopefully that's helped you as well. So that was a little bit about identity. The next part, in terms of the compass, is about character. So you'll see on the screen, it's actually a photo of Alcatraz. Sorry, not Alcatraz, Auschwitz. Bit different. Auschwitz, the concentration camp that the Nazi Germans killed millions of Jews in. So what is character? I'll refer back to this photo later. So what is character? Character is defined as the mental or moral qualities distinctive of an individual. So can we choose what these qualities are that make us distinctive? That's a good question. And there's a guy called Viktor Frankl, which suggests that we actually can. So who's Viktor Frankl? Viktor Frankl was actually is a Jewish psychologist, and he and his family went into Auschwitz, and all of his family except himself was terminated inside Auschwitz. I've read his book. He's written a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and it's really interesting that in terms of character, because there was thousands of people that went through Auschwitz, and when Auschwitz, if you managed to survive Auschwitz, you had a couple of choices. One was to go on and live a fruitful life, and others, they couldn't handle it and they killed themselves. So, what made the difference? Because Viktor Frankl went on to write many books about how to help people because of that circumstance. It built him up as a person, and it built his character. And I just remember some of the stories in his book, and one of them really rocked me to the core. Is like when some of the inmates or some of the Jewish brothers died, he was on a detail that actually took the bodies out to be stockpiled. And he tells the story of when someone dies, they actually take all their clothes off them because they didn't have clothes in those days, and that every bit of resource was needed. So they stripped the body down, and they were so weak because they didn't have any food that what he used to do is they'd have to push the bodies off these beds to take them outside. He was on that detail. And he talks about pushing this body off, and he can remember the sound of the head hitting the concrete floors. And it still just shakes me up a little bit. And then they had to drag the body out, and he just talks about taking the body out up some stairs, and he remembers the thud of the head as it hit each of the stairs as it went up the stairs and outside. And I don't know how he could live through that situation and the evil that was shown in that place. And I'll just read that quote that's on the screen now. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So that's my encouragement to you, in all the different circumstances that you're faced with, you still have a choice of how to act and how to respond. So it's a good book to read, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And it's with that understanding that we can choose, then I'd suggest as a man we look at these things. So I've identified 5 traits, character traits, that we should choose to behave like in order to characterize a man. So these are love, maturity, humility, and leadership. Now, I'll go into these a little bit more details in other videos, but this is just to give you a rough idea of what things we want to look at. These things should give you bearings as to where you're going in life. So again, just like a real compass, I've said it before, unless you know where north, south, east, and west, then north, south, east, and west is, then in terms of where you are, then you're going to be lost, right? So if you can use these same, what I would determine as bearing givers, so love, maturity, humility, leadership, and courage, if you can understand where they are and how they operate in your life, then it'll actually give you a good understanding of where you are and where you need to go. so you can be the best version of the man that you are called to be. And the last thing that I'll share with you is this, in that when you if you wanted to develop a skill, then skill can happen over time. But the good thing about character, which is the ones that I've shared with you, like love, humility, maturity, leadership, and courage, those things, characters can actually be attained or starting to be adopted instantaneously. So there's no time delay. Like if you want to be more loving, you can be more loving right now. If you want to be more mature, you can act more mature right now. If you want to be more humble, you can act more humble right now. If you want to be a better leader, you can be a better leader right now. If you want to take more courage in what you do, then you can do that right now. So that's really exciting. Like, you know, your journey to start to change from about your character, starts right now. So that's just a summary of about character and identity. Hope that's been helpful for you. We're going to refer. I'll do some more videos which you can watch about each of those 5 pillars that you can use for your bearings as you grow in developing the best version of yourself. Hope that's been helpful. We'll catch you on the next video. Cheers.